That day was my son's wedding. But instead of raising a glass in celebration, I stood at the iron gate of $1 million estate, knocking until my hand went numb, while my wife lay behind me, her breathing uneven, unsteady. Inside, the music kept playing. The drones kept flying. And my daughter-in-law said loud enough for me to hear, "Close the gate. Don't let anyone ruin the ceremony." In that moment, I understood something cold and clear. There are weddings built on love, and there are weddings built on the silence of a father. Before I go on with what happened that day, if you're listening to this story and it feels close to your heart, please subscribe to the channel to walk with me through the stories ahead, and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. Because what happened at that wedding didn't just change my life. It began the moment I knelt down on that freezing marble floor. I still remember the feel of the marble beneath my knees. Cold, slick, completely wrong for a day people called a dream wedding. I didn't come there as someone begging. I came as a husband. But in just a few minutes, every familiar line was flipped upside down. The reception was outdoors, under the heavy summer sun of San Francisco. Everything was arranged a little too perfectly. Tables in straight lines, glasses without a single mark, music just loud enough to set the mood, but never loud enough to drown out laughter. I thought at the very least the day would pass without trouble. Lisa stood beside me, holding my hand more gently than usual. I knew my wife wasn't comfortable in places like this. Still, she smiled, like she always did, so our son wouldn't have to worry. The food came out in the exact order Jessica had requested. I didn't think much of it until Lisa paused. At first, it was just a tiny frown. So small, almost no one noticed. I asked if she was okay. She shook her head and said it was probably the heat. But a few minutes later, the hand holding mine began to tremble. Her breathing lost its rhythm. I looked around for someone in charge, but every eye was fixed on the stage, where Jessica was smiling brightly into the cameras. That's when I realized, too late, that the special dish wasn't decoration. It was a choice. Lisa had made her allergy clear to the family long ago. It wasn't a secret, but at this party it didn't seem to matter. I decided to carry my wife to the car. Just get her out. Find air. Call for help. But as I turned, a hand stopped me. Not my son's. Security. They told me the main gate had been locked by instruction, to protect what they called visual order. I didn't understand those words until I saw the drone hovering above us, slowly filming every angle of the celebration. I looked for Christopher. My son stood not far away in a perfectly tailored suit, his face tense, worried more about the ceremony than his own mother. I called his name. He turned, saw Lisa, then looked at me. For a brief moment his eyes wavered. Then came exhaustion. "Dad, don't make a scene," he said quietly. "Mom's just overreacting." He didn't raise his voice. He wasn't angry, but something inside me closed. Jessica walked over. Her wedding dress glowed in the sunlight. Not a wrinkle, not a flaw. She didn't look at Lisa. She looked at me, like I was the wrong detail in a perfect frame. I said my wife needed to be taken outside. She adjusted her veil and replied, slow and clear, "If we open the gate now, everything will get messy. Traffic. Noise. No one wants that in a wedding video." I don't remember what I said after that. I only remember dropping to my knees, not to beg, but to keep Lisa from falling. The stone was so hard I felt it through my pants. Around us, people whispered. Some stared with irritation, like I was ruining a performance. My in-laws stood nearby. They didn't come closer. They watched. Someone smirked. Someone turned away, as if distance could keep them clean. I heard someone say, "Old people always overreact." It passed quickly, but it told me exactly where I stood. No one helped. No one spoke, except me. I did what I still remembered. The most basic things. Keeping Lisa awake, holding her steady. I didn't think about pride. I didn't think about the ceremony. I didn't think about the eyes on me. I thought about one thing only, getting my wife through that moment. When a side gate finally opened, not because of my pleas, but because of an older server who stepped in. I never looked back at the party. But I knew something had shifted. I walked out of that estate with a very quiet decision. Not anger exploding. Not a dramatic vow. Just a late, painful clarity. I realized that for many years, I had been silent for too long. and that silence had just been pushed to its final limit. That decision didn't come from any heroic moment. It came while I was sitting in a hospital hallway, staring at my hands. The same hands that had shaken while holding Lisa, and the same hands that once signed papers I believed were for my son's future. In that quiet stretch of time, memories began to return. Not loudly, not all at once, just small pieces drifting back, as if they had been waiting for years. I remembered the day Christopher called me. His voice was full of excitement. He said he had found his first big opportunity in life. Back then I was still working, but already close to retirement. Our small apartment in Manhattan was the biggest asset Lisa and I had. We always thought we would keep it as a safety net, something to lean on when we got older. But when Christopher said he needed capital to buy his first house and start out in real estate, I didn't hesitate for long. I sold the apartment, withdrew the entire retirement fund. In total, it came to $850,000, a large amount. But at the time, I didn't call it money. I called it trust. Lisa didn't object. She only asked one soft question. Does our son really need it? I nodded. And that was enough. In the years that followed, I saw Christopher change. Not in an obviously bad way at first. He dressed better, spoke with more confidence. But at the same time, the distance between us grew. Family dinners became rare. Phone calls grew shorter. When Jessica appeared, that change became impossible to ignore. She never insulted us openly. She didn't need to. It was in the quick glances at our modest home, the casual questions about our simple lifestyle, the way she arranged seating at family gatherings. Mark and Lisa were always placed at the table farthest away near the kitchen. For convenience, Jessica said. I believed her, or rather, I chose to believe her. Lisa was different. She always found reasons to explain things away. She probably grew up in a different environment, she said, as long as Christopher is happy. I saw the tiredness in my wife's eyes, but I didn't stop. I thought my patience would keep the peace. I was wrong. One afternoon, a few weeks before the wedding, I overheard a conversation I was never meant to hear. I arrived early to drop off some documents for Christopher. The office door was slightly open. I heard Jessica's voice, clear, unhidden. She was speaking to her mother, her tone light, like she was discussing a shopping plan. She said that after the wedding everything would fall into order, that Christopher would sign more papers, that the mansion would eventually be in both their names, and that the old people didn't need much space anyway. A low-cost care place is enough, she said, as if she were talking about moving old furniture into storage. I stood there for a long time. I didn't walk in. I didn't walk away. I thought about the money I had given, about the years of non-stop work, and for the first time I saw myself not as a father, but as a tool that had been used very efficiently. I didn't tell Lisa about it, not because I wanted to hide it, but because I didn't know where to begin. I still hoped I had misheard, hoped things would change after the wedding. That was how I stretched my silence a little longer. Then the ceremony happened, and that hospital hallway erased the last of those hopes. I sat there replaying every word, every look, every moment I had convinced myself it probably won't go that far. Now each memory carried a different meaning. They were no longer scattered details. They fit together into a complete picture, and it wasn't an easy picture to look at. I realized the disrespect didn't start that day. It had started long ago. I had just chosen not to name it. I traded respect for temporary peace, and the price of that peace had just reached its highest point. When I stood up from the chair, I no longer felt confused. Only a cold clarity. I didn't think about confrontation. I thought about taking inventory of everything I had given away and everything I still held. Because if there was one thing I learned that afternoon, it was this. When sacrifice is treated as something obvious, it will never stop until the one who sacrifices is the one who closes the door themselves. The door I mentioned didn't close right away. It opened into another path. Narrower, colder, and one that didn't allow me to turn back. Lisa was taken into observation. I sat outside, my back against the wall, listening to the steady footsteps of medical staff passing by. No one told me much. They just told me to wait. Time didn't move in minutes or hours then. It moved with each breath I imagined happening behind that door. An older server had helped me get Lisa out of the estate. He didn't say much, just lowered his head and opened the side gate. I didn't ask his name. Some kindness doesn't need to be remembered with words. At the hospital, I was told Lisa had gone through a very fragile moment. They chose their words carefully. No one painted a worst-case picture. But no one promised anything either. I sat there, hands resting on my knees, and for the first time that day, I allowed myself to shake. When Lisa finally stabilized, I noticed my phone had been vibrating for a while. Missed calls. A message from the bank. I opened it slowly, not in a rush, just because I needed something to keep my mind from drifting too far. The message asked me to confirm that a mortgage transaction had been completed. The property was under my name. I read it once, then again. My name was there. My signature was there. But I knew I had never signed anything like that. I called the bank back. The call lasted longer than I expected. They were polite, very proper, and every calm sentence they spoke pushed me one step further away from the reality I thought was solid. The transaction was finalized. The funds had been released. Purpose of use event expenses. I didn't need to ask which event that was. I wasn't angry. That surprised me. I thought I would shake with rage or raise my voice in protest. But no, the feeling came slower, deeper, like a heavy door closing behind me, firmly without hesitation. I sank back into the chair and looked toward Lisa's room. I thought about all the papers I had signed, all the times I said, "Go ahead, Dad trusts you," and now my signature had been reproduced perfectly, without my presence. I didn't call Christopher. I didn't call Jessica. I called Thomas. He picked up right away. He didn't sound surprised when I told him I was at the hospital. He stayed quiet as I explained what I had just learned. Then he asked one short question. "Do you still have the documents for the land north of the city?" That question pulled me out of the chaos. That piece of land. I had almost forgotten about it. It was part of a project Christopher's company was developing. It was under my name, only mine. Its value had risen sharply over the years, but I had never interfered. I thought that was the best way to support my son. Thomas said that legally the decision was still mine, and that what had just happened with my house was not a small matter. Not because of the money, but because of how it was done. I looked around the hospital hallway, at strangers walking past, each carrying their own story. I realized I was standing between two worlds. On one side, a husband who just wanted to bring his wife home safely. On the other, a father who had just discovered he had been pushed outside the boundary of respect. That night, I sat beside Lisa's bed. She was asleep, her face tired but calmer than it had been that afternoon. I didn't speak. I just held her hand, and in that silence I made my second decision of the day. I wouldn't make a scene. I wouldn't rush. I wouldn't demand apologies. I would take back what belonged to me, one piece at a time in the right order by the law, because this time I wasn't just protecting assets. I was protecting the final boundary of someone who had given too much. When I left the hospital the next morning, I didn't look back. I knew Lisa needed time to heal, and I knew I needed time to prepare. Some truths are only terrifying when they are dragged into the light too fast. I chose to let them step forward on their own, slowly but inevitably. That land was still in my name. Those signatures would need to be explained, and that glamorous ceremony, it turned out, was only the surface of something far larger. I walked into the parking lot and took a deep breath. Not to calm myself, but to remember this feeling. The feeling of a man who finally sees clearly where he is standing, and knows exactly which door needs to be closed next. 10 days after that afternoon at the hospital, there was a knock on my door again, not the frantic kind, but a measured knock, as if the person outside had rehearsed it in their head. I knew they would come. Thomas knew it too. We didn't prepare for this moment with anger, but with a silence that had lasted just long enough. Christopher stood on the porch, his face trying to stay calm. Jessica stood beside him, large sunglasses covering most of her face. She took them off when she saw me. A smile appeared. Right on cue, just the right size. The smile of someone who still believed she was in control. They said they wanted to talk. Said the misunderstandings after the wedding needed to be resolved. Said family shouldn't let small things tear them apart. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I opened the door and invited them in. In the living room, Thomas was already seated. Not in the center, just visible enough for them to notice his presence. There were 2 other people as well, dressed, simply standing near the hallway. I didn't introduce anyone. I let them guess. Christopher looked around. His eyes lingered a little longer on Thomas. He asked me in a voice trying to sound gentle whether this really needed to be taken this far. I poured tea. My hands didn't shake. I set the teapot down, then finally looked straight at my son. I told him that 10 days ago I learned something important, that some things only seem small when you're standing on the side that benefits. Christopher didn't respond. Jessica crossed her arms, leaned back in her chair as if waiting for her turn. Thomas spoke. He didn't say much. He simply laid out the basics. The mortgage transaction, the signature, the timing. It was presented like a report. No emotion, no judgment. Jessica sat up straight. Christopher stared at the table. I took out a folder. Not thick. Just thick enough to place in front of them. I didn't slide it over. I let it rest there between us, like a new line being drawn. I said that my investment in Christopher's company would stop, effective immediately. The project on the land north of the city would be suspended until further notice. I didn't say taken back. I said, paused. But everyone understood what those words really meant. Jessica laughed. A short, sharp laugh. She said I was overreacting. Said I was old, easily affected by stressful situations. Said everything could be fixed with one more signature. As she spoke, she placed another stack of papers on the table, very confident. I didn't look at them. I looked at Jessica. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to avoid her eyes. I said that before discussing any more signatures, there was something I wanted them to see. One of the men near the hallway stepped forward and placed a small device on the table. The screen lit up. It wasn't a long video, just a short clip, taken from the estate's security cameras that day. The sound wasn't perfectly clear, but the images needed no explanation. The gate, me, Lisa, and Jessica standing upright, saying one short sentence. The sentence I had heard through the music and the drone. The room went silent. No one spoke for several seconds. Christopher turned to look at Jessica. She opened her mouth, then closed it. No smile, no confidence left. I turned off the screen. I said that the footage had never been released, and I had no intention of using it to create a scandal. I only needed them to understand this. Some doors, once closed, cannot be reopened with sweet words. I continued, my voice still steady, that if things had gone any further that day, the consequences would not have stopped at finances. But right now, I wasn't looking for punishment. I was looking for an ending. Jessica stood up abruptly. She said I was destroying my son's future, that I was selfish, that I didn't understand the world they lived in. I didn't answer right away. I looked at Christopher. He stood there, silent, and in that silence I saw his choice clearly. I said my final words, that I had been silent long enough, that my support from this day forward would have clear limits, and that any future decisions would go through lawyers. When they left, there was no slam door, just the soft sound of it closing. But I knew something had just been shut for good. I sat back down. Thomas didn't speak immediately. He simply nodded. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel relieved. Just an emptiness, mixed with a rare kind of clarity. Outside, the afternoon passed like any other. No one knew that inside this house, a conversation had ended years of silence. And I understood then, the climax isn't when everything explodes. The climax is when someone calmly closes the final door and no longer has any reason to turn back. After that door closed, life didn't suddenly become peaceful. It simply became quieter. And sometimes quiet is the hardest thing to adjust to for people who have lived in constant tension for too long. Christopher and Jessica didn't come back. There were no more calls, only a few short procedural messages sent directly to Thomas. I let everything go through him, not to avoid them, but to keep the boundaries I had just drawn from being blurred by emotion. The changes came slowly, but they were clear. I heard the project had been suspended. The connections Christopher once bragged about grew silent one by one. Jessica's family withdrew just as quickly as if they had never been part of the story at all. I didn't follow it. I didn't ask. Some endings arrive on their own when you stop holding on. Lisa recovered day by day. In the mornings, she went back to the garden, watering the plants like she used to. We didn't talk much about that wedding anymore, not because we forgot, but because we both understood that some memories don't need repeating in order to keep living. One afternoon, as we sat on the porch, Lisa said she didn't want to return to the city, not out of fear, but because she no longer felt she belonged there. I nodded. I had felt the same way for a long time. I just hadn't said it out loud. We sold the house, not in a rush, without regret. Everything was sorted neatly, as if we were closing a chapter we had read long enough. The money left over after everything was settled didn't make me feel richer. It just made me feel lighter. We moved to a small, coastal town. No grand parties. No cameras flying overhead. Just wind waves and roads quiet enough to hear your own thoughts. In the evenings, Lisa and I walked slowly together. We didn't talk much, but the heaviness was gone. The idea of a support fund came naturally. Not to prove anything, but to make sure what we had lived through didn't end with our story alone. We used part of the money to help cover medical care for elderly people living by themselves. No big signs, no launch events, just small help given regularly when it was needed. I don't call it redemption. I call it continuation. Sometimes I still think about Christopher. Not with anger, with a quiet sadness. I've learned that being a parent doesn't always mean you get to stay in your child's life. There are paths they will choose to walk alone. And my role isn't to stop them, but to know when to stop following. One evening, as the sun sank slowly beyond the horizon, Lisa asked if I had any regrets. I thought for a long time before answering. I told her I don't regret giving. I only regret giving without keeping boundaries for myself. She took my hand. She didn't say anything more. And that was enough. This story doesn't end with victory. No one standing on a peak looking down. It ends with calm. A calm that came late, but came honestly. If there's one thing I want to say to those listening to this story, it's this. Respect cannot be bought with money, and a father's silence is not always weakness. Sometimes it is the last patience before someone learns to stand on their own side. What would you do if you were in my place? Cherish your parents while you still can. Because once trust is broken, not every door can be opened again, no matter how gently someone knocks. Thank you for staying and listening to this story until the very end. If it made you pause and think even for a moment, please press like to support the channel, subscribe so you don't miss the next stories, and share this video with the people you love. The lesson I learned is simple. Parents don't need repayment in money or spectacle, but in respect and being truly heard while they are still here. I'll see you in the next story.